Hello everyone, welcome to Coder's Art. In the previous video we have discussed about the Docker, what is it and why it is so popular. Now in this video we are going to learn how Docker work and also we will see Docker architecture. So let's start. In order to understand how Docker work on the operating system level, let's first look how operating system is made up. Operating system has two layers, operating system kernel and application layer. So as you can see in this diagram, operating system kernel is communicate with hardware like CPU and memory. Second layer is application layer. Application run on the kernel layer. We can implement different application top of the kernel. Docker and virtual machine both are the virtualization tool. Docker virtualize the application layer. So when you download the Docker image, it contains the application layer of the operating system and it uses the operating system kernel as a host. On the other hand, virtual machine have the application layer and its own kernel. Virtual machine virtualize the complete operating system, which means you download the virtual machine image on host operating system, it contains the OS and application. So the difference between virtual machine and Docker, first difference is Docker image much smaller compared to the virtual machine image because they have used to implement one layer and the virtual machine image is in gigabytes. Second difference is speed. Docker containers start and run much faster than the virtual machine. This is the simple diagram of Docker architecture. But before we see what is Docker engine. Docker engine is a core part of the whole Docker system. It is application which is follow the client server architecture and it is installed on the host machine. It has three components: server, REST API and command line interface. Server is the Docker daemon, which is also called Docker. It can create and manage the Docker image, container and network. REST API gives the instruction to the Docker daemon. Command line interface is used to enter Docker command. Now let's see how work the Docker with the help of Docker architecture diagram. Docker client. User can interact with Docker through the client. When any Docker command run on the command line interface, the client send them to Docker daemon, which carry them out. Docker API is used by Docker command. Docker client can communicate with more than one daemon. Docker registry is the location where the Docker image are stored. It can be a public Docker registry or we can say private Docker registry. Docker Hub is the default place of the Docker images. We can also create our private registry. When we execute Docker pull or Docker run command, the required Docker image is pulled from the configured registry. When we execute Docker push command, the Docker image is stored on the configured registry. Now let's about the Docker object. When you working with the Docker, you use image, container, volume, etc. All these are the Docker objects. Docker image are read-only templates with instruction to create a Docker container. Docker image can be pulled from a Docker Hub and used as it is. Or we can add additional instruction to the base image and create a new and modified Docker image. We can create your own Docker image also using a Docker file. Docker image has a base layer which is read only and the top layer can be written. When you edit a Docker file and rebuild it, only the modified part is rebuilt in the top layer. After run a Docker image, it creates a Docker container. All the application and their environment run inside this container. We can use Docker API or command line interface to start, stop, delete a Docker container. The persisting data generated by Docker and used by Docker container are stored in volume. They are completely managed by the Docker through a Docker command line interface or Docker API. Volume work on both Windows and Linux container rather than persisting data in a container writable layer. It is always a good option to use volume for it. Volume contains exist outside the lifecycle of a container, so using volume does not increase the size of container. So let's take overview how work the Docker or see workflow of the Docker. In the Docker workflow, a developer will define all the application dependencies and requirement in a file called as a Docker file. This Docker file can be used to create Docker images. In the Docker image contain all the application, its requirement dependencies, and when to run Docker image, you will get the Docker container. So the Docker container are the runtime instances of Docker of image, and these images also be stored in online cloud repository, which is also called a Docker Hub. You will also get the lot of images on Docker Hub, and you will also store own Docker image as well. Now these images can be pulled to create a container in any environment. So you can create a Docker container in test environment or any other environment, and we can show that our application run in the same way using Docker container. So guys, that's it for today. We will see other things about the Docker in upcoming session. Thank you.